Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Okiki podcast. And today I get the honor to interview Weldon Gray. He has done a lot of incredible things in his time in Saskatchewan, including being the Wacky Wizard. And one of the reasons we met was actually through Kelly, a friend of my sister's, and just I got to see the incredible work he's doing with recreations of Renaissance instruments. There's so many here, and I just thought his work, and he's like a gem in the city. So thank you so much, Weldon, for being willing to do this interview with me.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so if you don't mind telling our audience today, what was your educational and just career journey? How did you get into this world of actually creating instruments? Is that where you started?
That'll be a disappointment. Barely made it through high school.
That's really interesting to know. So yeah, what was your path really that led to this music and instrument creation?
Well, the first instrument I made was in high school, and high school wood shop, and I don't think anybody was doing it back. That was back when the earth was still square, and there weren't any kits. So anyway, I built a guitar in high school, and I guess that's where it started.
Yeah, so guitar, I assume there's a little bit more help there in terms of how to construct that because it's more commonly seen. So did that kind of get you thinking, like, what else?
Well, I didn't think of that for a long time because I grew up in a very small town in Arizona where music was Tex Ritter and that's about it. You know, it's just country western music. There wasn't a lot of exposure. So that didn't happen until I was actually an adult, and then moved to a bigger city, and then I joined a choir. I was exposed to things like Beethoven and Chopin and different types of music, which I loved.
Right. And
then further on, about 20 years ago, I saw a group called the Troubadours. And the music was so beautiful, I just couldn't get over it. And they did everything from about 400 to 600 years ago. Wow. And it was all, the music was really cathartic. It was like it wasn't in your face, it was just beautiful. And I was so used to electric music where the volume is so high that you're holding your eardrums and you just, if it's not noisy, it's not worth doing. And this was such a switch, and I just loved it. So then I started looking into it, and I thought, well, I'd like to have a lute. And so I tried to find out buying a lute, and I found out that you can't just buy a lute. And so then I started looking it up, and I thought, well, I built guitars, I could probably make one. So I researched it, and the research was as much fun as building it.
Interesting. So you really enjoyed that process then?
Yeah, the research was really great because you learn so much about history and where the lute came from, and you know, the lute came from the oud came from the Middle East, and you know, from Persia, and it goes on back. You know, the timeline on the oud is that nobody really knows when the first oud was made.
Wow, so it goes that far back.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow, so that's a really incredible start because, you know, you heard this music, it touched you. I think of like chamber music even. It's so beautiful to hear. It's like sometimes there's a small group even, but the harmonies, it just really gets you in a different way. So as a music lover too, I can definitely relate to how different styles have different kind of effects. But then you took that next step of going, okay, I want to buy this instrument. You couldn't find it, so I'm going to make this instrument. And you did the research. So again, like making that first instrument, what was that process? Was it hard to find the information? How did you even source like the types of materials you would need in the process? Like what was that initial process?
Well, the internet is full of it. So that made it really easy for me to do the research. Because and I have a lot of librarians who are friends, and every time a book is discontinued and it has anything to do with instruments, they call me and I can either come get it for free or buy it at the garage sale or whatever. Nice. So I have a good library, but the internet is just full. So like anything you want to learn, there's books available. If you really want to, you can find out about all kinds of instruments.
The lute was your first step. Where did that lead into? Because there's a lot of other instruments you've created since then. When did it kind of expand into a much bigger thing?
Well, then I guess the next instrument, I made quite a few lutes, and then somebody wanted the ancient Clarksack, which is the early Irish harp, which have completely disappeared from time except for specialized people like me who make them. And we have the Harp Club in the Saskatoon Early Irish Harp Club. But they are so specialized that they're so different than a real harp. The strings or wires are either iron, silver, brass, gold, and some of the wires depending on how much money you have to build it. That was the next thing I made. Somebody wanted one really bad, and of course, that's impossible to buy too, so I started making those.
Wow. Okay. And do you mind telling our audience your process in making those? Because as Weldon's explaining this, like, it might sound like, hey, I just checked the internet, I made it. But are there really, like, measurements available out there? Are there really kind of
Sometimes you
frameworks?
Can find things. I found one of the most efficient ways is find paintings. And people who lived in the Renaissance were usually smaller. I think I would have been a tall man then, and I'm 5'8", so which now is a short man. And especially with some of these basketball players, I look like a midget. So I found out that there's two bones. Yeah. Your funny bone here, and then this bone here. If you can get a straight on view of that in a painting, you can measure that and then measure the instruments and just do the math, and you can find out real close how big that instrument was.
And when you're saying paintings, you're talking about as life-size as possible, or just any paintings kind of gave you a
paintings from the Renaissance, like Vermeer. Okay. Yeah. Now he was a human photocopier. People didn't understand what he was doing, but he was probably using a camera obscura.
Okay.
And a lot of times people make that in their third grade science class with a shoebox, and they make a camera and it turns the image upside down. But anyway, he turned a room into a camera obscura, and a lot of his artwork was done in that room. And so everything was absolutely perfect.
Okay, so he was using very old technology to kind of really recreate this.
Well, to him, it was really new technology.
At the time, yes, yeah. Of course. But he was using what would be for us a very old school way of doing a photograph, really finding the science of it almost before people had really discovered it.
If you look at his paint, one of the reasons they believe that he used the camera obscura, because you don't know, is any time there was a horizon line, like the line on the piano. It wasn't straight. It had a camber to it. And what he did was he projected it on a wall. Yeah. Then he turned the painting upside down. And he actually painted all the stuff on the wall in another room.
Interesting.
And he did it upside down. But I'm sure he turned it right side up whenever you want to get an expression on an eyeball or something like that.
But it would help him have very accurate photos. Yeah. So you're saying those were the photos you used to look at the hand-arm measurements and go, I think that's how long.
If you have something with Vermeer, you can be perfect. But a lot of times you don't have Vermeer doesn't paint Hurdy Gurdys or sultries, that sort of thing. So you end up with having to use whatever, but you get a pretty good idea.
Very interesting. That's something I wouldn't have thought of at all. So thank you for explaining the background of that artist, because to me, when you said you look at a photo and you look at the arms, I'm thinking, what if it's this miniature photo? How do you know? So
it wouldn't matter because you do the math. Everything is relative. It's just the only thing that won't work is a foreshortened view. Yeah. Like if an arm is reaching for you, then you don't know what it is. That arm is. But if it's like this, you can get an exact of someone, but then you have to guess how tall he was, and most likely he was 5'6".
It's a very cool way of calculating, I have to say. And also in light of that, how many different types of Renaissance instruments have you created? Or like types that you can think of off the top of your head?
I can name them.
Yes, yes.
Clarksack.
Yeah.
The orbo.
Yeah.
Lute, oud, organistrum.
Yeah.
Hurdy Gurdys.
Yeah.
I don't know, my mind's blank. I'm running out.
No worries. There's a lot. There's a lot. And so I wanted to ask too, when you were making these instruments, that wasn't like your main thing at the time. When did it kind of become more of a main thing? Because you had this whole other career that you created with the Wacky Wizard, and that in itself is really incredible, that you really made a living in this other space that's kind of unusual.
Well, I did family magic, family entertainment, children's entertainment, but I was the Wacky Wizard. Mm-hmm. And I did actual magic tricks, but my persona was, I have had this trunk. I didn't know where I got it. I didn't know how I knew how I got it. It was my uncle's, but I didn't know anything about the magic. So I would start to show off, and I would be the victim of all of my magic. And the children absolutely loved it. Mm. By the time I was done, I had them completely convinced I was 6 years old and an idiot.
Oh my God.
If I'd done that, I had succeeded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you created that whole persona, that show, and toured Saskatchewan, right? Doing this.
Yeah, BC, Saskatchewan, Alberta. That pretty much covers it.
Yeah. And so I guess one of the reasons I bring this up is because between the Wacky Wizard and you creating these instruments, in a way, a way you created art, but you were able to make a living off of it. So in some ways, how did you let people...
That's the real magic.
Yeah. How did you let people...
To make a magic trick, no big deal, but to get paid for it.
Yes.
That's the
totally.
Trick.
So how did you let people know? Because I'm sure you know, as an artist, it's really great when you get to do what you love to do and you can live off of it. So how did you let people know what you were up to? And
I can show you pictures.
And get them interested in, you know?
I built a truck. This is the truck when I bought it. And this is the process of putting it back together and making a truck out of it. And then it was like that and like that for a while. I don't have a picture of the finished Wacky Wizard truck.
Wow, that is a pretty incredible truck. So basically, with your first endeavor as the Wacky Wizard, you're saying you decorated this truck, you made it look very elaborate and eye-catching, and that got people interested. So people were calling you. You didn't have to market yourself to people.
And I put my name in the phone. That was way back when they had phone books. So I put my number in the phone book. But so usually somebody had already seen the truck.
Yes.
And then they saw the ad. And that's how it worked.
It all pieced together. And so going from your years of doing the Wacky Wizard and learning how to promote that sort of creativity, did any of that give you lessons then when you started doing these instruments of how to let people know you're doing this as well?
Not really. No, there's not much of a spillover.
There's not too much correlation.
No, the instruments was like I worked weekends almost every weekend, and then once in a while we'd go on the road for 2 months doing the Wacky Wizard show. But the rest of the time was just downtime, and so that's when I could go in the shop and make instruments. But see, I never intended for that to be a business.
It just
It was a hobby.
So it was a hobby. So do you mind telling us how that became a business?
Well, people found out about it, like you, and people would come put me in the paper and stuff, and then people started wanting me to make things for them. So I did.
You said people found out about it. Was it just you telling your friends, like people you knew, like, hey, this is a hobby I've been up to, and come see these interesting creations I'm making?
No, I never could self-promote.
Okay.
So everything I do has to speak for me. I can't go out and say, hey, you need to, if I was a salesman, I'd have already starved to death.
Fair enough. I honestly, that I have to admit, I'm probably very similar. Yeah, so what I will say then is you actually seem to have discovered when you start creating these instruments, though, that there was a community kind of around this. Do you mind telling our audience, because I think some people might be surprised to know there's like a whole community around Renaissance instruments.
Oh yes, it's a big deal, and there's a movement back away from the electric music, which, as soon as they come on, they hit a chord, it pins you to the wall, and you hang there until they let you go, to the music that you actually sit down and enjoy like a good meal. And it's something new. Like even in this town is, I would say, music-wise, it's not a world leader, but there's quite a few groups here that do Renaissance type music, medieval music, that sort of thing.
Right.
The Troubadours is one of the groups.
Yeah.
There's a brass band that uses all of the old Baroque type musics, that sort of thing.
Yeah, very interesting. Like, what was your biggest surprise when you started making these instruments and connecting with these communities? Was there anything when you actually got into the community of the Renaissance, performers and people who actually want these instruments, that surprised you that, yeah?
I guess it surprised me somebody's willing to pay for it.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah,
you can't get it anywhere else, and I found out even people on meager means will figure out how to buy an instrument like an arch lute.
Yeah.
A customer from Alberta.
Yeah.
Wanted an arch lute, and it has 3 peg boxes. It has 30 strings. Mm-hmm. I've got pictures of it I can show you. It's an incredible instrument. It took me a long time to make it, but had no problem with the price, which was high. Not that I made a lot of money, but when you consider the hours, that surprised me.
That's interesting. Where's the furthest someone has called you from to request an instrument created by you?
I got one from Holland.
Yeah.
A guy wanting a Clarksack, but when he got the price, changed his mind.
As far as Holland.
It would probably cost as much to ship it there as it would to buy it. But it never happened, but that's the furthest away.
And then with the instrument creation itself, do you mind telling our audience too, how long do these Renaissance instruments actually take to put together?
I can give you a guess on months. I never pay any attention.
Right.
When I do a customer, I tell them it's a year, and it usually only takes me about 3 months.
Right.
So they're happy.
Yeah. You rather I
don't want to be rushed.
Yeah. You don't want to overpromise and underdeliver.
Yes,
so you're like, I'll give you a year. And then they're like, oh, I got it way earlier. Okay. Yeah, I do want an estimate, because I'm sure every project is so different and unique. And you'll see in the video, there's intricate details and painting and all sorts of things that are actually on these instruments. But just a rough idea between a lute versus a hurdy-gurdy, you'll see it's kind of it has this wind-up feature to it. I can't remember all the names, but there's a lot of stringed instruments as well. So roughly, maybe that's another question I should ask. What's the shortest you've ever taken on building one of these instruments, and the longest you've taken?
I probably can't help you there. Just delivered a hurdy-gurdy to a lady to BC, and I spent, I think, 2 months making it. That
was a very short project. And then are there ones that have taken you 6 months?
Like the Bosch lute, probably at least 8 months to a year. I paid no attention to the time.
Wow.
Because when I started, that wasn't my source of income. I wasn't worried about it. I could take as long as I wanted.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And that's kind of a beautiful thing too, because it was a hobby. It was something you enjoyed. You enjoyed the research, you enjoyed the creation. So you didn't have this pressure of time or anything. And so, for this one, because it was so different, when people were asking for, commission-based projects, things like that, was it through your site they were finding you? Was it a site you created? Was it, how did you even let people know before you had your site and things?
Through word of mouth. Mostly.
Through word of mouth, yeah.
And people like you doing podcasts.
For sure.
Yeah, word of mouth. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, I also want to segue into this other part, because you don't just make these instruments, you actually do lessons, I believe, and you teach these different instruments, and you've done some performances.
I'm not that much of a musician. I can learn to play a song on almost any instrument, but as far as somebody compared to a real musician who makes their living just playing, that's not me.
That's not your main thing.
No, it's not. It's lack of talent. I don't really have the talent to do that. I think sometimes anybody can learn anything, but some people are born to do something. Like Michelangelo was born to paint the ceiling in Sistine Chapel.
Yeah, and I guess the reason I'm asking that question is I think a while back when we talked, I think there were some instruments you said that people kind of gathered in your house for lessons for, but the instructor was all the way in Ireland or something like that?
Yes, well, we still do that. We'll be doing that this Saturday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the here it is.
Early Irish
harp club. And then this is it's a harp, but it's called a clarsachs. And it's from about the 12th to 14th century. It's when in its heyday. And that's one of my favorite instruments.
Very cool. Are there a lot of instructors like this around the world for the different instruments you made that can really help people in this area?
I think you have to go to Ireland.
To really get into
There's some people in the States that are, Ann Heyman in the States, Cynthia Cathcart is in the States, and they teach. That's a pretty rare instrument. It's an expensive instrument, and it's not a practical instrument because it's what I call monochromatic. It's all the white notes on the piano. So if you want to play something in the key of G, what you have to do is you have to sharpen the F, and so that you end up with the F sharp. If you want to play in the key of D, you have to sharpen the C and the F. And then if you need a C or an F, you're without it. So it's a very limited instrument. Also,
like 2 final questions. One of them is, if you met someone who saw this video and they're like, I actually really am interested in this. I'm really interested in learning about Renaissance, the instruments, just getting into this space. What would you suggest to them in terms of starting that journey?
To make it or play it?
Either one, yes.
Well, Kelly is starting to learn how to make them. But to play it, getting one, that's your biggest chore. And regretfully, there's a lot of these instruments, like on eBay and on Amazon, that sort of thing. But most of them are great for hanging in a restaurant for ambiance, but they're no good for playing. So, I would suggest that even if you have to buy a plane ticket to go try it, don't buy it on the mail, sight unseen. And then just get in touch with everybody you can. Go to the internet, go talk to people. If you want to play a Clarksack, I give Siobhan Armstrong.
Siobhan Armstrong.
Like, she knows more about the Irish harp than anybody I know. All you have to do is Google her name, put Ireland and the name Clarksack. It'll all come up. They have conventions where they rent castles and people go there and stay and have.
Wow.
I've never been able to afford to do it, but it sounds like fun.
That sounds like a really good time. So really creating that Renaissance.
When you get back, tell me all about it.
For sure. So that's awesome. So that's the playing part, really knowing how to source. And then the building part. Are there a lot of people like you that they can learn this from? Because there's so much research you've done and work that goes into that.
I don't know of anyone else who does it. Like, a lot of people make one instrument, but I don't know of anybody that I could just say, go talk to this guy. There's a lot of people I know who make guitars and make violins, that sort of thing. But the instruments that I make, you can't buy them at Walmart. And I got a little story. I did a show. We did a presentation at the theater down on 22nd Street. Oh, anyway, I was doing a presentation there during one of the shows, and some guy came up and he says, "So where did you get this instrument?" And I said, "Well, I made it." And he says, "Well, where did you get the kit?" And I said, "It's not a kit. And he said, well, where'd you get this?
Yeah.
Where'd you get that? And I said, well, I made everything but the strings. I bought the strings.
Wow.
Everything else I made.
Yeah.
And so, but he just couldn't get it in his head.
Yeah.
And then finally, he pointed to the crank on the Hurdy Gurdy, which I made.
Yeah.
Anyway, he says, well, where'd you get the crank? And I said, oh, Walmart in the Hurdy Gurdy aisle.
Oh.
And then he was happy. He walked away happy. He knew where to go get one.
Interesting. So actually, are you planning on doing classes in the future, or anything in the future that would help people to know how to make these instruments? Since you notice there's just not a lot of people in the space that do that.
No, I don't have any plans for the future.
Fair enough.
I'm just
Take it day by day.
I'm just doing what I do.
That's
and sometimes people come along and great. And if I can help you, I will.
Yeah, yeah. Very, very good. And then my last one was, what do you value the most about where you are today and the fact that you've gotten to, create all these incredible instruments and learn about this space? What do you value the most about that opportunity?
Well, I'd have to say my wife's a big part of it.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for her, I'd probably be homeless. But anyway, when we're on the Wacky Wizard tour, she's the brains in the family. She did all the booking, took care of all the money, and then the same with the instruments. Like,
awesome.
She takes care of all that sort of thing.
Love that. Yeah,
I think
that's a huge part of what made you successful.
That's the reason I'm not homeless on the street.
Love
playing
that.
My Hurdy Gurdy for pennies.
I love that. Yeah, shout out to Weldon's wife, definitely. Where can we find you? Where can the audience find you and your work and learn more about you online?
GraylorLutes.com.
At GraylorLutes.com. So if you want to know more about Weldon, more about the Renaissance work he's doing, be sure to check out that website. I believe he has some videos up of different things he's done. And if you're watching this episode, you'll see that we have clips of the different instruments as well. And so if you've enjoyed this, be sure to let me know how you enjoyed this special edition episode we did today. And be sure to follow Weldon and all his projects and share his story. So thank you so much, Weldon.
Thank you. It was fun.